not being able to come on.
It is my absolute pleasure, Mr. Chairman. Can we bow our heads wherever we are? Heavenly Father, we invite your holy presence into this meeting. We ask you to guide our thoughts, our deliberations. Give us clarity of mind, sense of purpose, and a patriotic spirit so that we make the best decisions in the interest of our fellow Jamaican people. In your name I pray. Amen.
Amen.
Thank you very much. Amen. All right. Any apologies for absence, Ms. Mack?
No, sir.
Any for late arrival?
No, sir.
All right. So,
if I might, I'm going to log out and try to come back in.
All right, no problem.
Thank you.
All right. So, the last meeting was January 13th. And today we're going to get a presentation of the matrix from the Ministry of Science, Energy, and Technology. And I've been informed also that our new energy advisor, Mr. Paul Hattle, who is the new consultant advisor to MSET, will be joining us in terms of being on the platform today to get a feel as to what's happening in the Joint Select Committee. So we welcome him and we look forward to working with him also during his tenure here as a consultant advisor on energy. The matrix today is going to be presented by MSET, and they're going to take us through quite a extensive matrix in terms of what they have come up with based on the presentations that were made to the committee. So we look forward to that. I think, Kadian, are you leading that today?
Good morning, Minister. I'm leading today.
All right, so Kadian Campbell is going to be leading on that. The confirmation of the minutes of the January 13th. Members want some more time. We wanted us to take it at the end in order to allow for those
yes,
who
please.
run through it. All right, so we'll defer till then. Welcome, Member Hill. Morning to you, sir.
Well, pleasure to be here, Chairman. Good to see you. Good morning to everyone.
Yeah, morning to you. And we can talk after this. You and I can catch up.
Yes, right afterwards, I was going to say that. We need to have a word.
Okay, great. Yeah, I have some information. All right, so so as I said, this morning, the matrix is going to be led by MSET, Kadian Campbell. So we turn that over to her and ask that she lead with the presentation. Thank you.
Good morning, Minister. Good morning, members. Good morning to the wider team and all the participants from the other agencies and those who are viewing online. Now today, the presentation of the ministry's response to the comments will begin. The team from the ministry consists of myself, Kadian Campbell, Mr. Todd Johnson, he is the new principal director in the energy division, Denise Tolo, Mr. Brian Richardson, Dr. Zara Oliphant, and Shanicia Pollack. Now, the private sector organization, in relation to the avoided cost, they expressed concern that there is no clarity in the definition of avoided cost, and there is confusion in the industry about how the avoided cost is derived. The avoided cost, as it is currently defined, means the cost saved by buying retail energy or capacity, both instead of building a new plant after taking into account the capital cost and the operating cost of the plant. Now, in the legislation, the avoided cost appears once in the act, and it is associated with the exercise of the right of first refusal by the single buyer, which is Jamaica Public Service Company Limited. Now, having considered the comment submitted by the PSOJ, it is the view of the ministry that the avoided cost, as defined in the Act, provides a sufficient guide on what the term means and how it is applied. It is considered that the avoided cost is a ceiling and not a floor. So the single buyer, in replacing the data generation capacity, must provide a cost for that replacement that does not exceed the avoided cost. And this is a condition for the exercise, one of the conditions and a critical condition for the exercise of the right of first refusal. It is considered that it is not prudent to indicate a methodology in the Act because in considering the replacement of generation capacity, the methodology would be applied in different ways. So it is our view that the definition as it stands provides the guide and to be reasonably discerned by all as to how the avoided cost is applied.
Mr. Chairman.
Right.
If I may interject here, I think a big problem is the whole idea of why. You can define the avoided costs anyhow you want to define it, but the a priori issue is why do we have this process? Because if you had real competition for the production of energy, the market competition would force the price down. That's what competition does. So we have to go to the a priori position and wonder why we have this. We have an engineered market position called right of first refusal, which of course we should be looking to change. So you have all these engineered positions that distorts what would normally be a fairly well operating market. If you had, for instance, and I'm going to say it again, if you had transmission and distribution in a separate company, publicly held because it's a monopoly, we're not going to have a second one, and properly run, and then you say to producers of energy, you bring in the lowest cost you can possibly bring for the kind of energy you have, and then we make a decision as to which one we want to use because of our needs. But we don't have that, so we have another further distortion called the avoided cost arrangement, which frankly probably has been manipulated in the past. So we need to make sure that we're looking at the real original question. Why do we have this in the first place? And if we have a well-working market mechanism in a world where you have different forms of energy competing, you have fossil fuel, and we're always going to have fossil fuel, whether we have it in heavy diesel, which I hope we don't, or natural gas or some similar better form. Then you're going to have the renewables that we have. We have wind, we have solar, we have some water. Who knows what else might come? But if we do not raise and answer that first question. Why are we doing it this way in the first place? We're probably just going to adjust it and amend it and tweak it and have answered the question, and you might be doing the wrong thing for what you need to do in 2022 and going forward. Thank you, Chairman.
Mr. Chairman, can I make a comment?
Yeah, go ahead, member.
Yes. I thought too, and I'm agreeing with Minister Hill, that the start of the ministry's presentation would have been a little bit more auspicious, and that we would have started with some of the higher policy level issues, because avoided costs comes way down, and certainly after we have looked at that bigger issue of the right of first refusal. Because if there is no right of first refusal, then it does not arise. What we want to see is full competition when it comes on to the generation side of the business. We want people to be able to come in, bid on the basis of least costs, not avoided costs, least costs. And least costs will be assumed when you have a genuine competitive system for procurement. And nobody should tell the bidders what technology to use, what fuel to use. What we want is the best price. And I believe that the right of first refusal is an anachronism. I was there, I know how it came about, but I don't believe that it should be continued at this stage. And I believe it requires some negotiations with the JPSCO. I think that we really should have started, and I'm agreeing with Minister Hill, at the point of this issue of right of first refusal.
Noted, member. Kadeen.
And Minister, if I could just further say, I am suspecting that today's presentation will enable us to resolve as we go on the position of the committee. So I know that you have noted, but I would love if we, as we move on each of these points, for the committee as a body to say yay or nay. Because I think we are down to that time now in our in the work that this committee has been saddled to do.
I support Member Paulwell completely on that measure. We need to make decisions to get to a place where we have to come back to a much bigger decision as to what we're going to do with this Electricity Act, because it's now urgent. And Minister Vaz, I'm calling you Minister in this instance, although I know you're Chairman, because of what I'm going to say next. You know the charge that we have. So we need to now get to a place where we're making decisions.
Agreed, member Paulwell and member Hill. Time is not on our side. The Kadeen, can we get a response in relation to the points raised by member Hill and member Paulwell, and also take into consideration that the committee would like to.
I'm not hearing.
Not hearing you, Minister.
You're hearing me now?
Yes.
Yeah, no, I'm saying based on member Hill and member Paulwell's comments, can you give us a response on that? And also bear in mind that what is being asked by the committee is that we actually take some final positions on the points that are put before us in the matrix.
Minister, members, it is appreciated, the comments that were raised, they are appreciated, but this would require further consultation with the team outside of this meeting as to why the avoided cost rate is used. We do understand that the right of first refusal is one of the main issues raised by this committee, and we propose to respond to the right of first refusal in relation to the substantive section at section 20.
But Ms. Campbell, as we're saying that this issue of avoided cost is so bound up with this issue of right of first refusal, I don't want to disrupt your presentation, but might not be possible now to just get to that main issue, and then we can come back in the order that you have it here. So we can sign off on that, because it will have consequences for the definition of avoided costs.
If I may, Mr. Chairman, before Ms. Campbell answers that, and on the back of Mr. Powell's intervention, I suspect what has happened, as the lawyers would do, they have gone through the bill and have prepared their response in accordance with the order that things appear in the legislation. So we're dealing with the section 2 definitions first, and then we'll go on as the bill progresses. So I think that's what it is. But I agree with Member Paulwell and Member Hill and Senator Hill that we need to look at it from an issue-related perspective. My contribution, so please.
I think there's consensus on that based on your comments, Member Golin, supporting Member Hill and Member Paulwell. So, Katie, can you take us to that right of first refusal and then come back to the matrix in the order you have it?
Very well, Minister. As I indicated earlier, and I hear Member Golden Campbell mention, the responses were prepared in accordance with the matrix that was shared. And what I could say briefly, and I would also crave your indulgence further to consult with the team. When we considered the right of first refusal, we looked at the third schedule to the Act and the related provisions at section 20. And this is a right that is also attached to the license that JPS has. The electricity license. So the right of first refusal is not only a requirement in the law, but is also, it runs in the license that JPS has. Now, when we considered the right of first refusal, we thought not to disturb it. Preliminary, we thought not to disturb the right of first refusal because there is need for time.
A point of order here, please.
Sure.
Member Paulwell did say that we're going to have to do negotiations with JPS. You cannot do this. We have a contractual arrangement with JPS and the license, and we have the law to change. We as policymakers are responsible for the laws of the country. Laws will have to change. When that law changes, people who operate within the jurisdiction have to recognize that the law has changed. But in terms of treating a customer well, JPS deals with the government. This is where we have to negotiate, because clearly from the beginning of these discussions, the right of first refusal was like, one of those pies that people throw in your face that they used to do in college some decades ago. You just can't get around the right of first refusal and the necessity to remove it if we're going to run our country. So no, you don't put this aside. You don't avoid it. You face it and address it. As Member Paulwell said, who actually was there when it was putting on, he's always confirmed that he was. And he's now saying, time has come for this to be renegotiated. That's how business and life works. But we have a job to change the law. The law is bad.
I don't want it to be seen as if
that's my contribution, Chairman. Thank you.
I don't want to be seen as playing tag team with Minister Hill. But Chairman.
Really, you could do worse. Member Paulwell, you could do worse. Come on, man. Let's tag.
I agree that this is a fundamental issue. And we are here really to determine what the policy ought to be. And we are signaling that this committee no longer finds favor with this right of first refusal. And it is for good reasons. Things and times have changed. We are progressing. Today, the ministry has what is called an integrated resource plan for electricity. And that plan envisages a whole range of new procurement, of new technologies, etc., etc. It cannot be that the government is going to be stymied by a provision that will concede all of the plan to JPS implementation on the basis of avoided costs. I don't think that is how we're going to be able to bring the greatest benefit to our consumers. And again, I will concede that at the time when this was negotiated, and I use the word negotiated because in all of these matters, negotiation is what is going to enable us to get the policy position implemented. When, and sorry to go all the way back to the year 1999, when we were trying to fashion a policy for telecommunications in Jamaica, we were saddled by a 50-year license. That 50-year license would still be current today. It would not expire until 2038. But the policy dictated that changes ought to occur. And
absolutely.
It is that in mind that we went back and said, listen, let us be reasonable. What do you want as a company? What do we want? What can we live with? But to say that there is a license that preserves this position in the face of dissatisfaction, people are upset that the price of electricity is where it is at. And we can't have labored so hard in this committee and to come away with the status quo remaining. It is just not going to be acceptable.
I think that is the sentiment of the majority of the committee members without even having to ask them. I mean, there's no two ways about that. So I think the decision is for us as policymakers to make, Member Hill and Member Powell, and I have no doubt about that.
Chairman, I just want to, because this is very difficult for the technical people sitting in a policymaking decision body. They said Joint Select Committee of Parliament, but they have to also be, they have to keep their ears open. I mean, if there's one issue that was absolutely unanimous among members from near the beginning, was that, you know, the right of first refusal has to go. So now to come and say that we're going to avoid it and not touch it, no, we have to be, you have to be more cognizant of what the policymakers are suggesting should be in place. So I'm sure this will be taken up in that fashion.
Mr. Chairman, might I also just make a quick and short intervention and just remind my colleagues that while the ministry, while the technocrats have a place in terms of ministerial policy, really and truly, we really ought to be hearing these submissions as one of the submissions that we are considering in the body of submissions that we have heard. And so I, for one, would be minded to hear their position, because I don't expect them necessarily to echo what the members have championed, but to give their position, at which point we would then be in a place to be able to make a decision. And of course, ultimately, Minister would guide where his policy directive is to go in the ministry. So I'm assuming they're speaking from a position of determining what their position, I assume they're speaking to give us what their position has been. I think we then need to take it into the decision process as you have indicated.
Minister, Member Golden Campbell, I only said what I said because the statement was made definitively.
I heard it, yes.
We chose. So I'm then I'm saying that's what I understand that their position to be. That's
yes,
why I made
and I heard it in a similar fashion, Senator.
Thank you.
So Katie, now you guided accordingly.
Let me unmute. Minister, as I indicated to you earlier, and members, we will be prepared to present in fullness the full consideration of the right of first refusal.
Okay, then we can
at a later date.
We should move on then. We understand, but let's move on and see where we get.
So yeah, but just to make it abundantly clear, you'll be doing that on the basis of what you have heard in relation to the members and their positions over the last 10 minutes.
Over the last few weeks.
We will review, Minister, in consideration of the comments that we have received.
All right, can move on.
If I may now return to the interpretation section. Now, the Office of Utilities Regulations expressed the view that the definition of codes should include provision allowing for any other codes to be added for future purposes should the need arise. The ministry agrees with that position. I'm not sure if there is need for me to go through to read the proposed definition.
If it remains as was presented, then I don't think so.
Very well. Well, it's just to add that any other codes that may be developed by the office. In relation to cogeneration, the private sector organization of Jamaica, in their comment, recommended that the definition of trigeneration is added. We currently, cogeneration under the Act means the production of both useful heat and electrical power from a single generating source. In our research, we came up with this definition for trigeneration to mean the production of a cogeneration system and an absorption chiller, which converts gas into electricity, heating, and cooling. The waste from the cogeneration system is converted into chilled water for air conditioning, refrigeration, or other cooling purposes.
Yes,
I think that's too. Sorry, go ahead, Member Paul.
No, what I think they were trying to capture is the situation that now obtains with the transitioning from LNG to natural gas, that there is this cryogenic energy that is given off that ought to be factored into the definition of cogeneration to bring it to trigeneration. That is my recollection. Can you just confirm that that is so? In which case, I wouldn't have a difficulty with this definition.
With which definition, member? The PSOJ one or the
Right, the issue of trigeneration. So before now, it was always cogeneration, recognizing that from generating electricity, you can have steam and you can have the electricity component. And that is recognized in the law. What I'm hearing is that there is a third element that comes out of this new technology, which produces cooling, which is the change from LNG to pure natural gas. There is a lot of cooling that is given off, and I suspect that is what is being recognized in this definition.
If I may just add here, Chairman, part of what I understand from people in the business is that what I see here, the waste heat from the cogeneration system is converted into chilled water for air conditioning, refrigeration, or other cooling purposes. Actually, the heat can be used to drive turbines as well. I think this might be limiting. So you want to make sure that the heat is used for other energy purposes, and don't just define it, because then later on, if we leave it at air conditioning, refrigeration, or other cooling purposes, what if you have a heating purpose that the heat can be used for? Then this bans it. So we want to write it a little broader, those who are doing the draft, to recognize that the heat could also be used to drive turbines. So we don't want to limit. I like the trigeneration, but I don't want to limit it to just what's in the second sentence. You have to broaden it to include usage of heat to drive other turbines or so on. So think about that. I mean, your technical people in energy can define that properly based on the thought I've just put forward.
Agreed, member. Agreed, member.
Thank you, member. That will be put to the team.
Chairman, Chairman.
Yes, Member Hilton, welcome.
Morning. I've been here a little while, just listening. I think the matter of point raised by Member Paul well about not just heat, but cooling, the cryogenic use of LNG must find a place in this definition. So whether it is tri or bi or co-generation, it is an important aspect of the benefits that should accrue with the introduction of liquefied natural gas. And so I'd like to see a definition that speaks not just to heat, but also to recognize the significant economic benefits of the introduction of energy.
Member Hilton, I think cooling is addressed, if you read it, the second verse, unless you want to have cryogenic included, but it says the waste heat from the cogeneration system is converted into chilled water cooling for air conditioning, refrigeration, or other cooling purposes. It is the fact that the heat is then tied to only cooling that I raised, that it should also be allowed for heating and driving turbines and not just limited to cooling, in fact. So I think your point is taken. I'm added to Member Paul's cryogenic comment, and we can broaden the definition of trigeneration a little bit to make sure it covers both heat and cooling in all its possibilities.
That's the clarity I wish to ensure is in this reform bill.
Noted, member.
Thank you, members. The comments have been noted for improvement of the language there. We considered in our review that it is important to define electricity, which is the main focus of the legislation. And the definition that we propose is electrical energy generated, distributed, transmitted, dispatched, supplied, or used for any purpose.
You can assume that silence means consent.
Very well.
Just following on the previous discussion. Electrical energy, however produced, I think I'd like to see that because we need to broaden the scope and to make it clear.
I agree with that, yes.
That would give its broadest definition.
Okay. Thank you, Member Hilton. We've noted for amendment. No, the OUR recommended that the definition for energy efficiency and energy conservation be separated because they're separate considerations. They are tied in the act, and we agree with the OUR that the definition should be separated. And we also agree with the definitions that they propose. And we are of the view that they're in keeping with the industry standards. So energy conservation means the practices and actions that reduce the amount of energy that is used. Energy efficiency, on the other hand, refers to changing technology or processes so that less energy is used to accomplish the same task or satisfy a need. I may continue then. The Private Sector Organization of Jamaica recommended that the definition of the term generate is amended to read the production of electricity by means of an electricity generating set to include production from renewable energy sources. We have no objection to the expansion proposed, and this is in keeping with the policy to enhance the use of renewable sources of energy.
While you are broadening the definition to specifically reference renewable energy, the point we've been making since we've been on this issue for a few minutes is that apart from my concern is that if you make an adjustment only to reference renewable energy, you lose the point that I made earlier that it is electricity generated from whatever source and not just renewable energy. If you want to say renewable energy and other sources.
And other sources.
Yeah, that's okay, but it can't be just for renewable energy sources. It could be interpreted to mean that that's what we intended and all we intended to do.
And that's a good point. I intend to, Minister, talk a lot more these days about nuclear as an option as well. So we need to find space for nuclear.
And other sources, I think, could capture an open-endedness and not just a specific reference to new renewable, important as that is.
It is accepted, Member Hilton. We move now to grid parity. The PSOJ, in their comments to this committee, stated that in the definition of the term grid parity, the definition of the term grid parity should make the basis of determining levelized cost of electricity clear. Now, the current definition for grid parity means when an alternative energy source can generate power at a levelized cost of electricity that is less than or equal to the price of purchasing power from the electricity grid. In our consideration of the comment submitted, we thought to adjust the definition because levelized cost is the net present value of capital investment for a generation set to produce electricity. On that basis, we propose a reformulation of the definition to mean when an alternative energy source can be costed at a net present value greater than that of the generation set. And we consider that it would address the determination of the cost for generation set as indicated by the PSOJ.
Ms. Campbell, you can't even read the thing, it's so bloody complicated. And I can tell you something, net present value, future costs, options are things I understand, doing it for years. This does not make sense. And as a policymaker who understands finance, I would never vote for it. Nobody can understand it. I'm never going to approve. I won't say nobody. Sorry. It's too hard for people to understand. You can't even read it easily. Please, no. Members, I would never vote for this, and I would vote against it because it doesn't make sense to anybody who's going to read it. It's crossed up. Come on, what are we doing this for? Again, what is the purpose of defining this grid parity? What is grid parity about anyway? Should it not be market driven than defined by some bureaucrat? It's a question I'm leaving on the table.
Yes, I think an explanation as to what is it we're trying to do with
exactly
is necessary before we actually get into the actual definition.
Agreed. Agreed.
Very well. I will yield to my team member, Todd Johnson, on this.
And anybody who is going to write this better come here and explain it to us. Anytime you write something as confusing as this, you better come, let me talk to them. Because this doesn't make sense for ordinary people who are going to have to use this law to make sense out of it. I can't agree with something that's written this way. And I want to understand why it's being written in the first place. Why are we talking about grid parity and not a market-driven solution? That's a real question. And then when we decide that yes, grid parity is the way we have to go, then we properly define it. But I don't know how we are even arrived at grid parity. I want that to be explained as again, back to the a priori question.
Hello, pleasant morning.
Good morning, Mr. Johnson.
All right. With respect to defining grid parity, that was done as per the requirement for the exercise. However, I am in agreement that there is need for competitiveness within generation to drive the cost of electricity downwards. Of course, given the current orientation of the market, which I agree we can change and will work assiduously to change, this was applicable given the current orientation. However, going forward, we understand that based on the current market prices or rates of electricity generated, that grid parity in most cases will outdo levelized costs given generation sets, the complexities and operating costs, maintenance costs, as well as fuel sources that drive those generation sets, where grid parity would be more applicable to renewable energy sources driving technology at a lower cost of generation. So that is the reason for continuing in defining grid parity as it is.
Okay, so
However,
I understand that, but this is not really the question. The issue is, should we even be using grid parity, and why are we not using market, especially where you are now? Grid parity, yes, interesting. In terms of where prices are now.
And I understand that, Member Hill. And going forward, we will, in revising or updating, keep competitiveness as the theme, as given the previous orientation of the Act. Of course, monopolization is the theme. So in terms of the definitions we see here forth, going through the document, of course, it is maintaining with the previous mindset and alignment for monopolization. So as we go through and get the comments regarding or moving towards competitiveness, I know myself and the team here at MSET are making all the notes necessary. And we're going to also work with the energy advisor, who is also viewing the proceedings, to ensure that all considerations are captured to drive costs down in the future.
Todd, that's a wonderful approach, and that's fine with me, because it's clear that you get the direction that we're going and you're working with us. Thank you very much.
Well, you know, without being too contentious, just to say that it was recognized in all of these things that you are transitioning. And in 2015, monopolization certainly was not the theme, because we had come some distance in a competitive generation side of the business. And we continue to have a competitive generation side, and we are insisting that, for example, the right of first refusal doesn't come back to be a bugbear in a competitive generation side. But it was acknowledged that we are moving gradually to get to a more competitive side. My disappointment has been that we haven't seen the regulations properly implemented to ensure that the net billing system has been continued, and I know over 600 licenses also would have been granted. So that is not monopolization, that is competition. I am saddened that we haven't seen wheeling, which was also provided in the law. So that is not monopolization, that is competition, that element has not been fully activated. And I hope that when we get to that in this review, it will be quite clear that we're serious about these competitive elements being now finally institutionalized in the system.
All I want to add to Member Paulwell is I am absolutely dismayed that it's only 600 licenses that have been given. That means, Member Paulwell and my colleagues, ordinary Jamaicans are not getting the benefit out of what is our constant renewable energy, the sun, because of the net billing arrangements and the cumbersomeness of granting these licenses. Only 600 over what? 1.5 decades?
Yeah, and most of them would have been signed by me.
And most of them probably signed by you. Over 2 decades? Come on. We're joking. So we have to ramp up. And it may very well be, and I'm putting it here, gentlemen, ladies, that we may have to just legislate that if we're going to be moving to renewable and climate change and so on, we're going to have to legislate to say, look, if you build something over a certain limit, you must have renewable water and renewable energy on it. We're a small country, drought happens, and oil price is now probably heading up to $2 billion a year that Minister Clark is going to have to, US dollars, to find. And we have abundant sunshine, and we're up to about 11% renewable energy or whatever the figure is. That just doesn't make sense. And we're discussing this now at a time when oil price is just touching $100. Come on, we have to change for Jamaica's sake.
Noted, and thank you, Member Paulwell and Member Hill.
Let me just enter on this very sensitive matter right here. I think I better just sound a note. And the note is one of caution. I appreciate fully where my colleagues are going and want us to get here. Let me make this point though. And those of us who have had responsibility for investment promotion, and I believe now the current member, Hill.
I do have that responsibility now.
Yes, let me make this point. In these matters, we have to consider, this is part of, this will just point us on the way forward, that investments are attracted on certain bases. While we must contemplate change as the environment change, I just want to say that the legislators can't and should not can't, because we have the power to do whatever we are so empowered to do. But I'm simply saying there is the issue of the grid and what happens to the grid, and how even in the situation of the introduction of renewable energy and net billing and all of these features which are to be added and to transform the system, as Member Paulwell indicated. In there's a need for some balance as to how we transition out of, because it cannot be that we ignore that we have been in that place where the grid had to be privatized for whatever the reasons back then. I don't want to go back to that period. I'm simply saying that there is, Chairman, my suggestion is that with some of the big issues that we are wrestling with, and the whole matter of right of refusal is perhaps one of the biggest, there will be, and there is the need for negotiation somewhere down the line.
Member Hilton, you probably were not here when both Member Paul.
No, please, Member Hill, do not interrupt me.
You were here? Sorry.
Let me just finish. I'm making a point, and you can come in afterwards. You're quite well within your rights to do that. I'm simply saying that as we talk about the transition that we're in and where we're going, I'd like us to have on board as legislators as well as policymakers that the whole matter of our environment for investment is very critical, and energy is perhaps the biggest. And therefore, I would like to, us as we go through and we see the changes and the introduction of competition, or the elevation of competition, that there are some critical other responsibilities we have. And one of the questions is, whither goes the grid, and how does that operate to the benefit of us all when we're through with this exercise?
If I could just respond, because
you go right ahead, Member Paul. I'll come in afterwards.
I think I'm a little bit confused, Tony. I remember Tony by your submission just now, because the fundamental objective I believe this committee has is to ensure that we get the best quality electricity at the most affordable price to our consumers and to our businesses. Otherwise, Jamaica's future is dark. And
I do not disagree with that. I do not disagree with that.
Right, and I thought you were on the same page with all of us in relation to some of the necessary reforms that we have to insist on to ensure that we get the best price and the best technology.
You may find that I am. You may find that I am.
Yes. Member Hilton, you're interrupting that you said I shouldn't do. I want to hear what the member is saying.
Thanks for your protection. I was about to say, Comrade Orbin.
No. That's a bridge too far.
Yes, but Tony, going back to this issue. So we have generation and we have distribution and transmission, which is the grid. And we have been working a long time to deal with generation. And it's true, we haven't really focused on the grid enough, because I believe a lot more pressure needs to be put, and it is only one company that can have the grid, and it is JPSCO. And we're not beating up on JPSCO, but we have to acknowledge that the price point is not there, and whatever it takes to get the grid more efficient and the price down, we have to insist on it. But it must accommodate all the reforms that are suggested: net billing, wheeling, the greater use of renewables across the board, and a competitive environment to facilitate all of this. So I don't think that we are going out of bounds at all. And especially your pet peeve, which is to ensure that those persons who operate in the SSZs, the special economic zone, right, that they are also facilitated, which is going to have some implications for the grid. But you would agree that that is absolutely necessary.
Absolutely, that's what I'm saying. Permit me, Chairman, this dialogue is very important, because I wish to, the point that I wanted to introduce in our consideration.
Really? It was my turn next. No, you see you're jumping before me. Anyway, no. Go ahead, Member Hilton.
Thank you, Member. Thank you. let me join issue with Member Paul, just to say that my intervention was not to deny any of the points made by Member Paul. What I was saying is that at the end of it, we have to the question of the grid, and he admits that we have to do the question of the grid is front and center of this all. And my simple point is, in all of the reforms that we are recommending, there has to be some consideration to the question, if all of this were granted, what is the state of the grid? What does that look like? And that is part of our responsibility. We can't say that we want everything and anything without any regard to what part of our responsibility must be, which is what then is the state of the grid. And that's the only point I was making. I am fully supportive of, and I'm on the thing. So remember, Paula, there's no, I've simply, and I think you acknowledge that the grid is part of the consideration here. That's all I was doing.
All right.
Just bring that
Chairman,
back.
this is a vital conversation. This is really the heart of the matter.
Correct.
Member Hilton, you won't have a grid if we don't push energy prices down. You notice Wysinco last week said, look, we came off the grid. We put in our own system. And big companies, which is really what JPS use to support the rest of us, are going to leave because the price of energy is too high. And why is it too high? Because, I remember from I came to this JSC, I made it clear, and I've gone public in writing, to say, look, we need to separate the distribution and transmission from the production of energy. I went further to say, because we have a contract, and I'll address contract later on, with JPS and so on, it probably will be the same shareholders, but because it is a monopoly, I said months ago now, and keep saying, part of it should be 20, 25%, 30% of it should be put on the stock exchange. You will remember that, because then ordinary Jamaicans could buy into what will be a monopoly, and therefore will definitely have some monopoly privilege pricing, and therefore Jamaicans should be able to buy buy their stocks to be able to help their pension later on. I went all that far. But if we don't separate the grid and make it an independent company, which now becomes very efficient, no investment has gone into the grid for much. It's fairly decrepit, excuse my word, but it has to be made an independent company, run for profit, and then the providers of energy from whichever legal source that they can compete to provide, to put their energy on the grid. So, but if we don't do that, Member Hilton, the price of energy is going to get so high, and only consumers will be paying for it. Ordinary houses like you and I live in. And the big companies, the Wysinco, the Grace, the Jamaica Brothers Group, and all those big companies will find ways to not use the expensive energy that comes across the grid. So our job as policymakers is to make sure we divide that thing up so that the competition to produce energy is enshrined in the policy that we're putting in. Otherwise, energy is going to be too high. Jamaica will never grow. And the big companies, the hotels and so on. I was in Spain some months ago with Mr. Bartlett, and many companies are looking to provide their own energy. It's too costly. Our job as policymakers is to find ways to drive it down. The last thing I'd like to say is, I did say at the opening of my statement that there is a law that we as policymakers will have to address, because that's addressing Jamaica's benefit. But there's a contract, essentially called the Electricity Act, that we have to negotiate, which I supported. Member Paul said it has to be by negotiations. He gave the example that the telecom thing would have been until 2038 if there was no negotiation. But you negotiate because things change, and policymakers have to make the best policies for the country. That is broadly how I see why I'm on the JSC and what I'm trying to contribute.
First of all, let me just say, it may have been that as I got connected a bit late because I have to get the link from Member Paul. So when I joined, maybe that conversation was had. But let me just, for the record, state that I don't see.
We've lost a member, Hilton.
Yeah.
Just
Sorry,
oh, you're back, Member Hilton?
Yes.
Right.
No, I was making the point that in response again to Member Hill, to say that perhaps I missed that initial comment because I was a little late coming on because I had to get the link from Member Paul. And so I wanted to make sure that in my contribution and my understandings, that maybe I capture what I missed earlier. But to make the point that all I wish to introduce at this, because I missed that point about contract and grid and whatever, is to simply say, this must be approached in a holistic way. So even as I give fulsome support to competition, and I'm not resiling from that, I'm simply saying all of that has to be in the context of a key element of it, which is a grid and what is the state of that grid when all of this is finished. And I believe everybody who spoke recognized that is part of the exercise as well. So whether, Member Hill, whether it is that there are specific demands and for investment in the grid and by whom, all of those, I believe we have to come away with a holistic and a coherent set of measures that would make this thing work, or to set it up for a negotiation that must come. That's what I was putting on the table, and I'm not residing from any of it.
I think Minister argument done.
Member Hill, your hand is up. I think that was previous.
No, that from long time. I should have taken that down long time, so sorry.
Just to support your point, Minister Hill, I just looked at some information. It is actually 15 large corporate companies that have come off of the grid and gone similar to Wisynco. And of course, for all of them that come off, obviously, you know who pays the price. So it's a untenable situation because, as you said, more companies are going to come off, and the more that they come off is the more that it's going to affect the price of energy to the average.
Chairman, one other thing that we have to do, and all of us as policymakers have to bear this, and I'm sure I'm probably lead minister on this at this time, is that we have to recognize that the economy has to grow. When we begin, if we're only looking at what exists now and the Wysyncos and whoever else leave the grid, we have to get medium-sized company turning into big companies and new ones coming in, and big companies coming from overseas to do our business, maybe in the season and so on. So we need to, as we grow the economy, we will get more companies. But if we don't get energy prices down to a reasonable place on a consistent basis, we will not be able to grow the economy. So the policy direction has to be, how do we, as Member Paul said, how do we get the best sustained lowest price to the Jamaican public, corporate and individuals? And if we get the corporates off going on their own way, individuals are going to pay a very high price for energy on the grid, and we cannot afford that.
All of my comment recognize the point raised by Member Hill.
Absolutely. So I think we're all sold on that, members. I mean it's an untenable situation. So. Proceed, Todd or Kadeen.
Kadeen.
In the definition for interconnection, we considered to include after generation sets or renewable generation systems. So it would read, interconnection means the connection of a transmission or distribution line between the generation sets or renewable energy generation systems of a generation licensee or a self-generator and the transmission system or the distribution system respectively. So
Again, my comment is that the focus in the commentary section, the focus on renewable energy is too narrow.
and other sources. Noted, member. If I may provide some information regarding the number of net billing licenses issued to date, I'm advised 1,018.
Oh, well, that is great.
Yeah, and we have what, 250,000 housing homes. We have a far way to go. But I'm glad to see that we've gone over the 1,000 numbers.
Sure. So we considered to include in the reform legislation another option for self-generation, which is auxiliary connection. It is not unknown, I would say, but it lacked the proper legal framework for use of this type of arrangement. So we've proposed a definition for auxiliary connection to mean connections made by self-generators to the single buyer for the purpose of stability, reliability top-up, or redundant supply with appropriate mechanisms to block the sale of electricity to the single buyer from the auxiliary connector's power generation source.
Well, please, again, my concern is this definition, the explanation that it is for the purpose of stability, reliability, top-up, or redundant supply, the appropriate mechanism. That it can't be limited to just those purposes. Among the purposes must be, as we were discussing, to reduce the price of energy, the economic price of energy on a sustainable basis.
We seem to be missing that every step of the way. It's the real reason we're here.
Right. So it must be included as a purpose, one of the purposes. In fact, perhaps the main purpose. But I accept that stability, you may need to admit.
Yeah, we have to have stability, yes.
Stability and all of that, but it cannot be missing from the purpose. That part of it is for the economic, reduce the economic cost of energy in a sustainable way.
The team will consider when we meet to review the comments here. We will consider that suggestion to improve the definition accordingly. In the integrated resource planning definition, the private sector organization recommended that the word resilience should be included. The suggestion is agreed. In relation to net billing, the OUR suggested that the definition for net billing should be modified to reflect the potential for such arrangement with any other supply licensee. Now, the ministry is of the view that the extension to supply licensees would attach to the single buyer, would impact the single buyer license as it currently exists, and that particular license is exclusive to the single buyer, and therefore we considered that it might not be useful at this time to consider. And I will hasten to say that having benefited from the discussion thus far, I am aware that the committee require consideration for liberalization in the other category of licenses.
May I add at this point? Certainly. That it's not just, I mean, it is true, as Member Paul points out, my pet peeve about our whole understanding and a coherent approach to the SEZs, that the single buyer concept has been used to really have a net negative impact on the development of the SEZs. Why? Because even as the developers of SEZs have the burden of identifying and bringing in new clients, not existing clients. In fact, the law prohibits existing clients in the main, except as users, from entering the zone, and that you have to bring new clients to the table. Having brought them to the table, what we've done is to say, if you come to the table, and even though we've said that the SEZ developers can generate electricity, it is confined only to themselves and not the clients that they have worked hard to bring into the SEZs. And we must then hand them over to JPS to be strung up with high prices. This is not workable, and it's part of the solution that we must find. So the single buyer concept is one that is, again, problematic because the definition has been brought island-wide without any consideration of what then is the role and definition of the SEZs that are supposed to be outside the custom zone of Jamaica. And we have not thought through and given effect to that in our application of the law.
Chairman, to support Member Hilton, I see consistently through this the complete exclusion of market forces. Anytime you have single buyer or right of first refusal and them terms there, somebody's microphone is open and they're talking to their children. When you see single buyer, right of first refusal, those terms, those are market restricting activities. So you need, if it has to be, you have to interrogate it completely, understand what you're agreeing to, fully have yourself briefed. And if it doesn't make sense for the overall good of the country, it should not be in there. So I completely support that, but also we seem to not be cognizant of the fact that this is to move us closer and closer to a more market-oriented and a more market-efficient arrangement, and no special, as Minister Clark would tend to say when he's doing the Banking Act and so on, and the fiscal accounting and authority laws. It has to be rules-based, and rules-based can't be single buyer. So I'm supporting that it needs to be rethought and redrafted and represented.
If I could just comment on that, Chairman and Director to Minister Hill, the definition of single buyer recognizes a technological fact, and that is there can only be one grid at any time in a country, and especially a country as small as Jamaica. And that's the reason why I support Minister Hill's position that probably ultimately what you need is to separate the business and have different accountings for generation, and JPSCO is involved in generation, as are the other players, from the transmission and distribution, which is by its nature
a monopoly business.
A monopoly business. And because of that, you have the term the single buyer, because it is one person who owns that grid and that will purchase from others, which will facilitate net billing, wheeling, and so on. So I agree that we should have a full separation of the two functions that go towards electricity. And in that regard, then there's nothing wrong with having a single buyer.
In fact, you wouldn't even use single buyer, member Paul, you say the grid, because, or whatever the grid is called, because as I have conceded, there will only be one, it will be a monopoly, and that's why it should be put on the stock exchange so ordinary Jamaicans can own some of it. So I'm down the road with that already.
I would love to contend with you on the issue of the stock exchange. I know that the minister has given us tremendous leeway to have this discussion, but Tony, you need to
yes.
Just so that you can bear this in mind, so that when we have the full debate, I am not sure that the Wigton experiment has gone well, because my own view is that after the initial small broad-based investors came in, I believe that Wigton...
Somebody's microphone is open.
Someone mute your mic, please.
Yes,
it is mute your mic.
It is my contention, because we did support the democratization of these ownership and to put it on the stock exchange. But my observation, especially in relation to Wigton, which has lessons for this JPSCO divestment, is that within a month or two after the IPOs, the larger bodies that we were anticipating would have gobbled up the shares. That is what has happened. And the small players who were initially attracted and purchased shares, they are nowhere to be found at this stage. And I'm not too sure why, but I think that analysis has to be done before we continue to trumpet, Minister Hill, the value of putting these things on a stock exchange. But
I'm glad you're speaking as a member, because you use the term trumpet, which could be political. So I'm not going to address trumpet. I'm going to address what I said about making, remember now, the grid, which is a monopoly. The Wigton Farm is not a monopoly. It's one of competitors in the energy field. When you get to the grid, it's a monopoly. Stock market, stock prices are bought for a long period. It's not for 1 or 2 or even 3 years. People who held NCB for so long made a lot of money when it was changed. But no, I'm not talking about a competitive situation here to be put on the stock market, Member Paul. And we'll have the discussion privately if you want. I don't mind, because I'll have some views on Wigton. But when you're going to be a monopoly, and it's clearly a monopoly, Jamaicans across the board must have the option to participate if they so choose, and it cannot be held up with 5 or 6 or 10 investors in a monopoly business in a small country like this. So on that, we're going to have lots of discussions. But remember now, I'm talking only as a monopoly.
Remember, Chairman, let me just ask a question. Remember, Paul, when you said it's only one grid, and that the technology allow. Does the technology now allow for microgrids?
Of course.
What are the implications of that?
Well, you can have microgrids that relate to the main grid. You can have in greenfield projects like the SEZs, a body that establishes electricity and generates by way of microgridding to the customers within that defined location. We'll have to get back to that, especially as it relates to that issue that you've been raising, because I do also support the view that for new companies coming in to grow our economy, establishing in an SEZs, they should be able to generate their own electricity.
We thought to update the definition of local authority in the Act to reflect the current change in the status and name of what used to be the Parish Council and Kingston and St. Andrew Corporation, which is now Kingston and St. Andrew Municipal Corporation. So the language there was taken from the Road Traffic Act 2018. The OUR stated that the definition of power purchase agreement should be expanded to contemplate agreements between generation licensees and supply licensees, and not exclusive to the contractual arrangement with the single buyer. They have suggested that the current definition is modified to replace single buyer with supply license. C. Now, the ministry had thought not to disturb the single buyer designation, and we so we've decided not to disturb the single buyer designation at this time.
Why? In the face of the discussion, why even the suggestion that the single buyer replaced by supply licensees? Wouldn't that attenuate some of the pricing issue that we are concerned about?
No, I thought Tony.
Sorry,
that I was more convincing than I thought, in that because there's just one grid and there's one operator of the grid, that one grid and operator in effect is a single buyer. So what I am sensing here is that the OUR wants to also recognize those suppliers to the single buyer. Not a problem, but I certainly wouldn't have an issue with the current concept and definition of single buyer.
Okay.
Chairman, I don't think Ms. Campbell had answered the Member Hilton's question as to why the ministry took that position.
The ministry took that position when we looked at the scheme of the act. The supply licensee was exclusive to the single buyer. And that is why we took that position.
You know, I have a concern about this, even though I understand it's a grid. Member Paul, if we as policymakers are not going to recommend that the grid be separated by policy from the providers of energy, Member Hilton's point might be a good one, because right now you have a conflation of costs and operations. They're not quite sure which is efficient and which is not. It's not clearly one part of the business is carrying the other part, and Jamaica pays the cost of that expensive inefficiency. So I would just prefer, and I would support I would just say buyer, because it's one. But it's important now that we agree that we are looking at the separation of distribution and transmission, clearly and separate as a separate legal entity, separate operating company from the provision of energy. And if we don't do that, things like this are going to come up. And I think we should quickly, Chairman, get to that place whether we're going to suggest that as a policy change, support it or not.
Any comments on that suggestion from Member Hill?
No, I think we're all agreed that a more transparent way has to be developed to determine really what is happening with electricity in Jamaica. And a more transparent way is if we can see on the one hand what is clearly happening with generation, and that you can do by separate accounting. And then on the other hand, to see what is happening on transmission and distribution, and that you can see that by separate accounting.
And two separate companies. They have to be two separate companies.
Well, I certainly support the separation of accounting. I need to reflect a little bit on the two separate companies, Minister.
Okay. But if we're doing two separate accountings and the CEO is responsible for reporting, I know how the accounting will be done. So we have, unless we separate, and because they're so, if we were not going to get the competition we need for driving energy prices to the fairest market, lowest market level for Jamaicans, if they're combined, no matter who the CEO is, accounting alone won't do.
It just means, Minister Hill, that you would have gone even much further than I did with liberalization of telecommunications.
And now we're in 2022. You did a great job back then. Without you doing what we did, we wouldn't have what we have now in telecommunications. And if we don't do what we have to do now, you know what's going to happen. And then energy prices are where they are. This is our time to do what we have to do. So let's consider it. You say you have to take time to consider it. That's fair. But we have to separate them to make sure we get the best benefit, because one is covering for the other.
I'm in the same position as Member Paul. I would need to look at the transparency and accountability is critical. I'm not sure the only way you can get it is separation, but I'm not closed my mind to it.
All right, can we move on? We are pressed for time. We're gonna have to look at how we manage the time based on the limited time we have for these joint selects, which is approximately 2 hours for each session. So, whereas I've been very liberal because it is required for everybody to be able to express themselves, and of course, for the ministry to get an understanding as to where we are as policymakers. Where if we're to finish this and get it implemented, then we're going to have to improve on the use of time. And that was not meant for Minister Hill and Member Powell only.
Those things never bother me if I have a point to make. Never done. You're the chairman, I follow the chair.
The definition of single buyer, the OUR has stated that the definition of single buyer does not take into consideration the purchase of electricity through cogeneration, power interchange agreements, and dumped energy arrangements, which are features of the electricity industry. It is recommended by them that single buyer definition be amended as follows. Single buyer means the licensee whose license obligates it to purchase electricity generated by independent power producers, persons having net billing arrangements, co-generators, and persons with other arrangements.
More comprehensive.
If I may offer the ministry's position, we agree with the amendment to the definition. We thought that co-generators really fall under independent power producers. And we thought that it might be prudent for it not to appear, since that type of arrangement with independent power producers would cover co-generators. In relation to standard offer contract, the OUR has requested that the definition is expanded. The current definition means a contract developed and approved by the office for use in promoting renewable energy with capacity limits established by the minister under a net billing arrangement. They propose that the definition include a contract developed and approved by the office for use in promoting renewable energy and other sources that reduces greenhouse gas emissions, to include but not be limited to energy from cogeneration and trigeneration systems with capacity limits. The ministry, having considered the proposal by the OUR, is of the view that the reference to cogeneration and trigeneration would need to be qualified by the following renewable energy fuel types: biomass and biogas, which is not applicable to LNG or fossil fuels technologies, which do not fit under standard offer contracts because they are not renewable energy sources.
Agreed. It's a point I've been making consistently.
So extended to other sources.
Are you serious?
Is that the only comment? If I may move on. So the concept of stepping rights appears once in
I'm sorry, Ms. Campbell, I was trying to unmute. Just in relation to what the ministry's position on this, is it, do you have a proposed, a suggestion for how you would how you would amend that definition? You need to qualify, yes, but how, I'm trying to understand.
how the definition would change.
Yeah.
I may defer to the team to answer in relation to the technology. Ms. Tulloch, could you respond, please?
Yes, thank you, Ms. Campbell. Thank you for that, Member Goulding. With respect to the definition, where it says it's the PSOJ who put forward this definition, and where it says to include but not limited to energy from cogeneration and trigeneration systems, we would just include trigeneration systems fueled by biomass or biogas. So that is
accepting the PSOJ definition then.
Right. So we're accepting the definition with the qualification that it is fueled by bioenergy.
And LNG, that's a question of fossil fuel technologies.
LNG or fossil fuel would not apply because net billing is for renewable energy sources only, exclusively.
Okay.
Thank you, Ms. Tulloch. So we considered to include in the amendment to the act a definition for stepping rights. This appears in a crave your indulgence, please. This appears in section 38 of the Act. and it deals with situations where the landlord of premises is exempted from exercising right of distress over lines or other equipment that is installed and in the possession of the single buyer. So it exempts the minister. I'm sorry, this particular right of the landlord is not exercisable in events where the minister has to exercise his stepping rights. Now, under a number of the generation licenses issued by the ministry, the minister has what is called a stepping right, and this is a right which allows him or anybody designated by him or her, if the minister is female, to step in and take control of the operations of a generation facility where the licensee is unable to meet its obligations for whatever reason, his obligation to supply electricity to the single buyer and to the grid. So we considered that it would be prudent to define stepping rights in the act, and it's basically a right where the minister assumes responsibility if a licensee is unable to meet his obligation, and the licensee having been given time to remedy any situation that is affecting the supply of electricity to the grid. Now, so in summary, in section 38, where the landlord or owner of premises is able to exercise a right of distress over equipment belonging to JPS, it will not occur in instances where the minister, having exercised a stepping right, has control over any such premises. If there is no comment, I will move to the other. In the definition of system operator, the OUR indicated that the definition is not clear, as it is the current single buyer that is licensed to conduct dispatch activities and not a department of that entity. They have indicated that perhaps provision should instead mandate that the single buyer conduct its dispatch activities through a ring-fenced department. Additionally, they're of the view that the current definition does not anticipate the possibility of a standalone dispatch licensee as contemplated in the Electricity Act. In such a scenario, there will be no need for dispatch activities to be conducted by a ring-fenced department. And then the single buyer would not be engaged in competing activities such as electricity generation, as is the case with JPS. They state further that the provision for system operators should be reviewed and revised to provide clarity. For example, the definition could be restricted to a licensee holding a dispatch license. An express provision is already included in Part 7 of the Act that requires that dispatch activities be conducted through a ring-fenced department where the system operator also engages in generation, distribution, and supply activities.
Chairman, I'd like to comment on this. The Chairman?
Right, so go ahead, Member Paul.
Right. This is another one of the fundamental issues we face, because we have, on one hand, a competitive environment being established and emerging on the generation side. You have a number of players, and ultimately, all those players should be vying for priority dispatch. What do we mean by dispatch? It is that electricity that you put on the grid for distribution. It is that which the single buyer purchases that goes on the grid for distribution. And there's a priority system that gives you the least cost that is called upon first, and then the more expensive ones come below in a priority order. If you do not have an independent body monitoring, adjudicating, supervising that process, then you're going to have a lack of transparency. Again, our ultimate aim is to get the lowest price to the consumers. There are some systems that are incorporated in a take or pay arrangement. And I'm hoping that that will never happen again, especially in a fully competitive generation market. But that notwithstanding, there is still a ranking as to who gets dispatched in a certain order. So a certain time for the day, you only need 400 megawatts. So you go to the least cost of the generators to get that. At a certain time of the day, you need 700 megawatts. So you can incorporate others, but it is done in a particular ranking order based eventually on the price. Now, I believe that the OUR has not accepted my recommendation for the OUR to be this body, and I'm not too sure why. It is proposing that a separate department in JPS be established. But once it is a department within a company that is an interested player in the scheme of things, you're not going to have the full transparency that is necessary. And I really I don't want to create another regulator. We have too many regulators. So
and you'll have conflict of interest, member.
Yes. So are you suggesting conflict of interest with the OUR?
No, I'm saying if you have it, what you suggested, if you have a department in a company.
Right. Precisely. And don't care how you ring fence it.
You're going to have conflict.
You're going to have problems. So my suggestion is that this system operator should not be a ring fence department in the JPS code. It ought to be an external body. And I strongly recommend that the OUR be that body.
I support that recommendation for the reasons advanced by the member. You can't have the system operator insisting on right of first refusal and participation in the generation, and at the same time, the merit order is determined or invigilated, supervised by them. I think you need an independent regulatory body. That's a regulatory function, and I think that the OUR should step up and play that role.
We also considered, chairman and members, that in light of what the OUR indicated and in light of the importance of the dispatch activities, that we would need to consider this further. There's a substantive provision coming up, and we also considered that in order to really conclude on what this system operator should be or should be properly defined, that we need to give further thought to the system operator functions as expressed in the Act. We also recognize, as we have been advised, that the equipment and other infrastructure there are owned by the single buyer. So we would also need to consider that. And we do recognize also that even though the Act contemplated the establishment of an independent department within the single buyer, we do understand the conflict in establishing that independence. And we have been advised also that that particular provision has not been operational since the inception of this Act.
Yeah.
So we crave your indulgence to come back to you on this particular system operator construct. So JPS has submitted its comment. It proposes that the words in the definition here shown in the red strike through, this is the existing definition. Renewable energy source means energy sources that are not depleted when exploited and include sources prescribed by the minister by order published in the Gazette. They recommend that this portion in red is deleted. We support the recommendation because we consider that it is a matter of science in terms of how these sources are defined from time to time. Nonetheless, we acknowledge and are prepared to augment the provisions at section 21 to reflect the move towards a greater use of renewable energy sources. We propose this renewed definition. Renewable energy sources means energy sources that are not depleted when exploited and include sources such as hydroelectric, solar, wind, and biomass. Those are the renewable sources that we currently use in Jamaica.
It is 12 o'clock. Yeah, how much more you have to complete this section?
A lot more.
All right, so we better put that on hold.
I think it's a convenient time, Chairman.
Convenient time. Call you right back. All right, before we close off the confirmation of the minutes, January 13th, the last meeting.
Before you go to that, Chairman, I want to have one thought on this. I understand it's the science, and we want to make it as scientific as possible. But in the final analysis, it's elected governments who make policy. And I'm not going to argue strongly for it here, but I'm very wary of excluding elected members from making important final decisions. That's just for a comment, not necessarily to change this, although I would like to see this to include as currently in use for the definition of renewable on the right-hand side, as currently in use, put there so it's very clear that others can be considered when they become current. But I leave that as a suggestion. Thanks.
I have
Or
a
if
further, I have a further suggestion. I think based on the fact that we have the matrix now, and we are going to pause today for another meeting, it may be actually quite useful, members, if we go through the matrix and have a caucus, so that when we come back the next time, we basically have agreed positions, and also we can get through much quicker in terms of what dealing only with the issues that, only with the matters that we have issues with, in just for use of time. So I will be in touch with you and we can discuss that further, but that just came to me as a preemptive, proactive measure that we could use rather than having to use the time on the platform here during the 2 hours to be hearing the various concerns and recommendations. So I leave that.
I'd love to see the whole matrix in one place. So if it could be sent to me, I'd be happy to.
Yes. So I will instruct that the matrix we sent
to members,
to all the members. I suspect it was done already, but just to make sure that it is done.
The updated one. So just send it again for me.
Give some time for it to be reviewed. And then I think if we had a caucus of the members of the joint select prior to the next meeting, I think we'll utilize the 2 hours much better.
And Chairman, because I do get so many emails, would somebody be just kind enough to send me a WhatsApp and say, look, we've sent it for you, because and who is the sender, because I might just lose it in the, as others of us will, in the whole raft of emails that we tend to get from day to day.
Chairman, in light of the observations you've been making about time and the best use of time in conducting the business of this committee, you may want to consider, and I don't know at what stage, but my experience has been that in these situations, the 2 hours might be very cramped, very limiting, and you may want to consider, Chairman, whether we have a 1-day retreat or 2 days, as the case may be, to just focus and break the back of this thing and move on. I have found those focus retreat to be most helpful.
And face to face, we can talk.
Good suggestion. Good suggestion. We will definitely follow that up, and between what has been suggested here, we will come back in short order to see whether or not we can put that together. But that would be also a very good suggestion, because I think we'd be able to really get break the back of it, as you said, and set some timelines for completion, because without the timeline being set, obviously we'll be here continuing deliberations till the kingdom come.
Mr. Chairman, if I might, and I also champion my colleagues' suggestions as to how we can move forward efficiently and get through this quickly. But might I also ask, and it's not that I wish to task the ministry staff with more work, but I think it would be helpful if perhaps the MSET team could reorganize their matrix this is separate from the updating of the parliamentary matrix, but in a way that outlines the issues and the related clauses, so that we can have an issue approach to the position that the ministry is setting down, as opposed to what we would normally do in terms of amendments to any act, which is a clause by clause analysis, because we are at a place where we still seem to not have completely decided positions, certainly from the ministry perspective, on the policy issues. And if we could thrash that out and get in clarity what the ministry policy is before we make the decisions, that I think would be helpful in terms of moving forward, whether at a retreat or further meetings. And I would commend that to you.
Good suggestion.
Consideration.
Good suggestion. And I will. I'm sure that they have taken that on board. I think what is being suggested in the different comments here is to find an easier way to go through the matrix, and also a way that we can actually break the back of the recommendations and come to agreed positions, so that we can move on. So points well taken, and we can have further dialogue on it, members, to try and see what's the best setting to do this, whether we do it through a retreat, and of course, obviously, we continue with the meetings thereafter. All right, so MSET team, you got those inputs a while ago, so please follow up with PS and myself to set the way forward. All right. The minutes of the 13th of January, if we can just get someone to move. And second, if there's no corrections and then no matters arising.
I wasn't here at the last meeting, so I don't think I can move. So somebody else would have to.
Member Paul?
Yes, I've gone through and I will move.
All right. Seconded?
I can second, Minister.
All right, Member Hill. All right. So productive session, good inputs. And of course, we will discuss and see how best we can really tighten up the matrix to make it more easier to us to go through. And of course, how we can set some time to really get to the bottom and break the back of this. All right, on the next date, let me just check and see. What's the next date being proposed?
Sir, based on our early discussions, it would be April 7th.
That's a result of the Firearms Act.
Yes, sir.
The BPM booking out most of things. So maybe that's perfect timing in terms of being able to have the time to do a retreat or
yes.
And then being in a much better position at April to be able to get some movement on it. All right, so April 7th, you said?
Yes, Minister.
What time, 10 o'clock?
Yes, sir.
And we'll be notified formally, so yeah, I'll get it on my calendar.
Yeah. And please remember to do the format that Member Golden is suggesting and get it out to the members as quickly as possible. And then, of course, we can have a quick discussion among our members as to how to move forward in terms of the suggestions that have been made. All right, until then, keep safe, everybody.
All right.
And see
Thank you, Minister.
We'll talk soon and then back on the 7th.
Okay.